Welcome to telling the show in my best Willem Dafoe as Nosferatu voice.
I have nothing after that. Why? Why, man? This is our first ever Halloween episode.
Ooh, it's spooky. Or
It
it's
is
mainly
so
it's spooky
spooky.
how like close to the mic I'm putting my mouth, and that's not an ASMR joke of any kind, I promise.
And it's not hygienic in this time of pandemic. I hope you sanitized.
Look, it's my mic. Nobody touches it. Get away from my mic. Don't touch my mic.
All right, so we are back. I mean, all in all seriousness, we are back with another episode. So welcome to Telling the Show, a different kind of podcast. Why? Because we are not yet working professionals. We are working on being professional, but we haven't broken that ceiling yet. So we are learning with you guys as we go along.
But we are prepared to dance on glass, so to speak, without hopefully cutting our feet and bleeding. Because among us, we're some of us are about to be produced, coming into being produced, or we have different parts of our creative entertainment industry entries happening at different stages. And we're all the time getting there. Everybody's trying to get there, and the struggle never stops. So we're here to celebrate a lot of that.
And we're going to be talking about something so interesting and on the cusp of like being like the next big thing. And it's writing for podcasts and audio fiction. Not that Chris and I have a script because we are just so naturally talented that we don't need a script,
What are you
but
flattering me for?
because it's a weekday and
Because it's Thursday.
because it's Thursday.
Yeah.
But our episodes come out on Friday. I don't know if you noticed that. But anyways,
This is where she's going to limbaste me no end for that.
so audio podcasts. We are going to be talking about a new audio podcast called Red Riding Hoods, and no spoilers because I'm halfway through episode 3 and I don't want to know what happens until I can immerse myself in it myself. But we're going to be talking about writing scripts for the audio space, which is completely a different medium.
Right. It's like writing for audio dramas, like much like they were in the early stages, like in the 30s and 40s when you had Orson Welles voicing the Shadow, or radio programs, much like what television became. And then later audio dramas for like book and record sets, like I had as a kid, where I would listen to Superman and read the comic along in the book. Or if for you Star Wars fans, if you had the book and record sets where you'd uh, read the text at the bottom of the photo of us from a scene in Star Wars, and R2D2 would beep and you'd turn the page, that sort
Oh
of
my
thing.
god, I did have that. Oh my god, you're bringing back memories.
Yeah, and showing how much of a dinosaur I am, and I apologize profusely. But look, I'm really excited on both fronts because that's a big part of my childhood, and I love the audio drama space. And I know we talk about screenwriting, but writing script writing of any kind for any medium where you can have an arc, where you can talk about characters and bringing characters into the fold and storytelling, is just, it's a really cool element because it's basically doing a different way of exhibiting some of the same things that you're trying to come across as a writer. And the other reason I'm psyched is because a fellow alum of the MFA program Denise and I graduated from, and a good friend of mine, a great guy, David Quiroz Jr., is here with us. He's the writer of Red Riding Hoods, and this is an audio drama podcast currently available anywhere you get podcasts. And it features some great voice talent. I think some of the voices I saw listed on it are actors and actresses on General Hospital. And for us, talking about the subject of the craft of writing, it's interesting because it's the premise of delivering audio drama in the horror genre, which is a space I know, David, you take I've read some of your feature scripts in horror, and man, you take the taco on that, man. It's badass. But so what's the premise, or logline maybe, if you will, for Red Riding Hoods?
Cool. Well, thank you both very much. I just wanted to, tell you how much I appreciate the kind words. Really appreciate you having me on here to discuss the show, to discuss writing in general. The premise for the Red Riding Hoods is basically the concept of the final girl, who is the lone survivor at the end of a horror movie. And in this audio fiction podcast, Red Riding Hoods, it's a team of these final girls have joined forces, and they're on a road trip to go hunt monsters and research or investigate the apocalyptic conspiracy that they discover unites all these monsters. And I don't want to get too spoilery, but basically like why they are being targeted or why they were involved with this in the first place. So it starts off as like a monster of the week of everybody hunting these final girls hunting monsters, and then becomes, they realize there's something bigger at play, and what is that? And I hope that everybody sticks around for the ride, because I'm really proud of where it's at. It's 10 episodes, and I think the 10th episode is just one of my favorite things to have ever written.
That's amazing. I've been listening. I'm a fan. So I have a couple of I guess shout outs from my 2.5 episodes in. One, I think it's like a female driven supernatural, which is like, if you know me, it's one of my favorite shows, and I was like, this is cool, this is chicks being badass, and I love that. There was a funny moment in episode 1 where the first gunshots were fired, and there was like a pause, and then another gunshot, and I was like, oh, that brings me back to like the Sam Raimi Army of Darkness kind of like humor, and I loved it, and I laughed out loud, and I was on a public bus, and it was kind of awkward.
Oh,
But
that's awesome.
yeah, and it was like, oh, there's that extra one for good measure. I think your storytelling in this, what I would call like a vocal medium, is so interesting. Like, you get to, like, I already feel for your I don't want to give too many spoilers, so it's hard to tell the story, but the woman who leads us through this journey, and how she loves her sister and her family, I'm actually like absolutely just like sucked in, and I'm like, oh, how did all these girls come together, and who is Mother? And then there's that moment when she starts singing the nursery rhyme theme, and I was like, oh my god, I got goosebumps and chills, and I was like, I'm in for the 10 episodes. And then the last thing that I just felt like, just generally, is that the relationship between the men and the women in this story is very, very interesting, and I think it's something that hasn't been explored fully before. And I'm really excited to see, I'm just going to say it, how the FBI character comes into play. Because, one, I love his voice. And two, I'm just like, okay, who is he? Because I just want to know. And how is he going to affect this story? So, this is, I will tell you the truth, the first audio podcast that I've ever listened to, and I really haven't been enjoying it. I think it's great, and I'm like, it's kind of like those old monster movies where you're like, okay, I'm tuning in next week because I want to know what's happening. And to get that from a podcast, I didn't think I would, and I'm shocked at it. So congratulations! I'm so excited to talk to you.
Oh, that's so cool. I mean, just you have no idea how happy that makes me to hear you say that. I mean, that's just, when you write something, and one of the things that, and I know that we've all been there before because we're all writers, we've all written screenplays, is, you write something, you take it out, you're trying to get it picked up for representation or for production, and it's just, you can hear like, a handful of responses, and that's it. Nobody else ever gets to see it because it just, unfortunately gets stuck on the pile waiting for the next round or whatever. And so
Right.
to have something out there that people are listening to, and it's like, it can be nerve wracking because you put so much love into this, and these characters are my babies, and I know everything about them backwards and forwards, and I've crafted them, and I just, I want people to care about them. And when you hear somebody say that they do, or somebody picks up on like a mystery, like what is the FBI agent's deal and things like that, it's so gratifying. And that's been the last few weeks have been a lot of fun to have people reaching out to me and just letting us know about some of these things that they're picking up on and appreciating. So it just means the world to me.
They're probably asking for spoilers.
They are, and I'm not giving them any out. So
Nice. So
Good for you.
so you're directly engaging with the listeners with this?
yeah, it's been a lot of fun. People have been hitting me up on social media, I'm not hard to find, and so it's been really cool. The director Sarah Joy Brown, who was a veteran actress, she was a soap opera actress for like 20 years or so, and just she's amazing. She's been so much fun to work with, but she has such a big following, and so she's getting a lot of fans that are reaching out and kind of following along with this adventure as well. It's been really cool.
So we
Cool.
know you are like an accomplished screenwriter, um, but what made you choose this genre for your work?
I will be 100% honest. This was not the original intent of the work. So the Red Riding Hoods was written as a TV pilot. It was taken around. It got optioned once by a fairly large production company, and I thought, this is it. This is happening. And then just it's as is so often the case, just because somebody buys it from you doesn't mean they're going to do anything with it. And the rights returned to me after production never started on it. I was hit up by this company called Violet Hour Media, who does fiction podcasts, and basically they read the script, they loved it. They asked me if I'd be interested in converting it into a podcast. And at first I was like, I don't know about that. I mean, that just doesn't sound like that's the right fit. But the more I started thinking about it, the more I was like, oh, okay. So I started not visualizing, but like listening to it in my head, closing my eyes, going through it, thinking to myself, how would this work as an audio cue? And then it started to click with me that this could really happen. And then knowing that this was an opportunity to do an entire season instead of just doing the pilot and then letting it go nowhere, which happens in TV all the time, just the opportunity to finally realize this world that I had fleshed out. I knew where this season was going to go. I have 4 seasons planned afterwards because when you do TV, they always tell you, we want 5 seasons. Like, can this story sustain 5 seasons? And
Hmm.
so even if you're never going to get there, you have to know in your head. And so it's a lot of work to put in. And then the idea that it would never go anywhere is just heartbreaking. So when somebody comes along and says, we want 10 episodes of this, that really, I mean, it was just like a godsend to me. And then, like I said, Violet Hour has done this is like their 5th podcast, I want to say, and so I knew that it was a really talented team. They have a great reputation. Their previous works, the Elmwood Strain and In Another Room and The Gloom, they've just done some really great stuff before, and so I was a fan of theirs, and I wanted to be a part of the team. And once I had to adapt the pilot episode to an audio format, and then episodes 2 through 10 were all written for audio specific. So it wasn't like I had to backtrack or like convert anything from visual to audio format. It was going forward. It's all it's written specifically for the podcast format.
Oh, so that pilot was the first episode was essentially your pilot. Was that
Yes.
not written for that medium?
Yeah, I mean, I did. So I rewrote it to make it
Oh, okay.
conform better because there were quite a few things in the original TV pilot where it just wouldn't have worked audio because it all relied so much on visuals. And so figuring out a way to be creative and convert it without having the girls just going, or the Red Riding Hoods and the team themselves going around saying like, look, there's a killer over there. Oh no, he's got a knife and he's coming right for us. And
Right.
you have to get away from things like that. The executive producer Cassie Josepho, who is the I guess CEO. I mean, she's the producer, but she runs Violet Hour Media, and she coached me on avoiding a lot of things like that. Like at first, I was like, "Should we turn this into to where it's like a true crime podcast that's happening live?" And she's like, "No, because I want to do a fiction. Like, what excites me about your story is that we can do it like this, and I don't want to convert it into a you know like every other true crime podcast that's out there and things." She's like, no, I want this to be a horror fiction, and let's challenge the audience a little bit with it. And so that's what we've been doing.
That's
Interesting.
wow. First of all, talking about the conversion, that's one of those things I'm really interested in because we're all of us understand that film is a visual medium. We're dealing with audio, so you can't do anything. You really can't be on the nose. So you have to do theater of the mind stuff and still, in an audio sense, paint your pictures, set your scenes, and still drive narratives forward. So there's obvious similarities between audio drama and writing screen features. But what was the difference between it in writing for podcasts that surprised you?
I think how important it is to make every character's voice different on the page. I think a lot of times We hear that, and I'm pretty sure we all heard that when we were in school of, how important it is to make sure that that dialogue pops because it needs to be distinct for characters. And then there was always that exercise that they would tell us to do where, it's like cover up every character's names, and if you can't tell who is who based on the dialogue, then you know it's not distinct enough. You need to be able to do that, and that was such a great lesson to learn because once we started writing for the podcast, it really those characters had to be so distinct because there's essentially four female characters speaking at once or having these back and forth conversations, and if they're not distinct, if all the audio starts to sound the same, and that's not just saying the actresses voices, which the director Sarah, she was very careful to select actresses and actors based on the way that they sounded. So I think she was telling me like a few people she loved, but they just didn't sound different enough to where she was afraid that people would be confusing who they were when they were listening to it. So she had to, sometimes she had to pick somebody based on making sure that they didn't sound too much like another character. But the dialogue itself as well, that really helps the audience pick up on, when they hear this phrase, when they hear this tone, when they hear these types of Kayla in the show is the one who is like the youngest, and so she's got these, she speaks with vernacular of somebody who's in their very early 20s versus Rosie, who is the one from she's got a thick Boston accent, but she also speaks the way she's very condescending in her language, and so she says things like dear, and when somebody says that she's right, she just replies indeed, things like that. And then Dahlia is she speaks very metaphysical and grandiose and things. So making sure that those clues were in there for your audience to separate the characters, I think was a big lesson, along with background noises and making sure that transitions were done with audio. Like what sounds does the audience hear right away to clue them into where we are, kind of thing.
I thought it was interesting in listening with headphones on that it seemed to be told in like mini chapters. So like we're done with the scene, and then there's like the briefest of pauses, and then we move on to something new, like a new setting. Like when she goes from walking away from them to being in that church, there was just like the briefest of pauses, and I was like, oh, this is really cool because like it's like flipping the page, and there's that white space, and then you're going into that new scene with like, okay, show me what you got. And it was really cool. And I don't know if that's true across the board, but I thought it was really interesting. So in your scripts, how do your full length feature scripts, how do they how are they similar to this? Because you're going from like a visual storytelling into an auditory one, but like are they the same subject matter? Like what do you like to write about? I guess is my question.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm definitely, Chris said it earlier. I am totally a horror fanatic. I mean, horror is my go-to genre to watch, much to my wife's chagrin, but it's like that's my absolute favorite medium, and it's what I gravitate towards to write. So, the Red Riding Hoods was just the latest in a long line of scripts that I've written, features, and I've written a few TV pilots, but this was the one that I've worked on the most. A lot of them were just early drafts, but a few features that I've written have been gone on to various levels of success and exposure within the industry. But horror will always be what I'm drawn to, and I pass it on to my kids. My daughter is already a huge horror fanatic. She's only 11. I don't let her watch anything inappropriate, but she loves spooky stuff. She loves the idea of being scared and things like that. So I think she's gonna hopefully follow in my footsteps with more talent and success. But
Is that is the idea of being scared what draws you to horror, or is it about the I don't know what word to use, but like the exclusivity of those characters that only exist in horror genres that draws you to that?
that's a good question. And I would say it's definitely because I don't nothing. My daughter's always asking me like, what's the scariest thing for you? And I'm like, I am at my age, I don't get scared. I don't watch a movie to get scared anymore, but I love horror because it gives us a way to confront things that we are afraid of that aren't. And the best horror movies and the best horror media allows us to confront things that we're afraid of that aren't necessarily the creature or the masked maniac and things like that.
Mm.
It's like, what does that represent? What's the bigger story we're trying to tell? What's the bigger fears that our characters have to face that's represented by or that's enabled by this monster that they're facing down? And that's something that I think all horror media throughout history has been, whether it be these fairy tales that kind of allowed us to confront the idea of death or the idea of loss, all the way through things like Dracula, where it was very clearly a nobleman feeding on the working class, or things throughout history where it's like it's always represented something bigger. And I think there is a place for just surface level horror that's just satisfying. Hey, I want to watch something violent, or I want to watch something that's crazy, because I certainly do still watch those types of movies, but my favorites are ones that have a bigger story to tell behind that horror, if that makes sense.
Oh,
Absolutely.
it totally does, and it leads well into the question I wanted to bring to you. Knowing that horror is very much a cornerstone for you, um, and the fact that Red Riding Hoods is just a really great malleable idea. I mean, I see this thing; it could play well in a comic book. It could play well in, you know, just the stupid sick marketing person in my brain wants to see Red Riding Hood action figures, just saying. But the core idea of it seems like it's very malleable. So what was the inspiration behind getting to Red Riding Hoods, other than obviously, how steeped you are in horror fiction?
Yeah, it was the idea of it was just basically always I had picked up, and I'm not by any means the first person to pick up on the idea of a final girl. I mean, it's been done in academia. There was a whole book written about it called Men, Women, and Chainsaws, and movies like Scream, and even there was a really great horror comedy called The Final Girls that came out a few years ago. That they all explore this concept of the last survivor, who is usually this tough female, and why does it have to be a female? Why not a male? And it's usually because the female versus the male dichotomy, and the good versus evil, and feminine power versus male violence, and things like that. And so there's a lot of things that have been done to as almost dissertations of this, but I always thought nobody ever described like what do they go through afterwards. And that was what I always wanted to know, like what happened after the camera stopped, after the credits rolled. These characters are not just going to go back to their normal lives. And so I thought to myself, like, if they found each other, wouldn't they seek out each other, kind of like war veterans tend to enjoy each other's company, not because they want somebody to talk to about it, because they rarely do talk about it. Instead, it's just knowing that somebody else has shared these experiences with them that they can be comfortable with, that nobody else can. And the idea of these ladies finding each other and then realizing that there is still evil out there, and that they are the only ones who have ever stood up to it. So they've got to go out there and proactively put a stop to it and hunt these things down, and make sure that what happened to them never happens to anybody else.
Just as a suggestion, and I'm not trying to, bring any toxic masculinity into anything, nor am I trying to um, court the feminist vote, but in a later season, if one of your monsters happens to be a movie executive, not that I want to ruin your career anyway, it seems like it could lend itself well to the situation, because that's a horror show we haven't really. Oh yeah, we've seen that played out, but not in a
That's so
fictional
funny
context.
because that's like the male view of like, oh, let's make it a movie exec. And I'm like, oh, I wonder if we're going to have on later seasons what happened to all these other women.
And I'm seeing, like, as soon as you mentioned the PTSD nature of it, about how war veterans will come together, my thought, and sad to say, male ego and fanboyism, to throw it into the mix, but I thought of, okay, you got Captain America kind of enjoying a little bit of that in one instance or another in the Avengers movie. So I'm like, Red Riding Hood, this is like the Juliette Lewis at the end of From Dusk Till Dawn version of the Avengers, if you think about it, not to undercut the eloquence with which you've written this.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I really wanted to sort of, because they are action heroes or heroines. However, I didn't want, and I made a point of this, is that in Denise, I apologize if I'm spoiling anything, but episode 3, in episode 3, the girls and I don't like to use the word girls. I'm sorry for that. But the Red Riding Hoods basically they are no longer gun-toting uh, vigilantes by the end of that episode. The guns are taken away from them or otherwise made obsolete because I did not want to write a story about given the state of our country and everything that's going on, where it just seems like, hey, if I have an assault rifle, I can solve any problem out there, and I wanted to get away from that as quick as possible. So for the first episode, they're toting these firearms around and they are able to take on like the foot soldiers that they face, but the monsters level up and the guns are no longer able to be effective against them. And so I'm requiring them to do something different than just, hey, I'm going to grab a gun and go take care of whatever problem I have. And I don't know, for me anyway, it was like at one point this was being developed by a Canadian TV company, and I remember one of the producers telling me, like, why do Americans think that they can solve everything with a gun? Like, let's get away from that. And that really struck me, and I was like, you know what, that's a good point. And it made me think outside of that box of just, they can't go around with their shotguns and ARs and pistols. So starting in episode 4, and at the end of episode 3 it's made clear why this is the case, and then starting episode 4 they're going to have to fight evil a different way, and it requires each of them to kind of go into their past, and we get to know the characters a little bit more as a result of all these journeys that they have to take to be able to level up, I guess, as it were.
It's interesting. It's like a conversation that Chris and I were having about does it have to be a light bulb? It's like, does it have to be a gun? That's really interesting, and I'm super excited to see these heroines' journeys with something that isn't so masculine, I guess, is the word I would choose for guns. But yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting to challenge these characters. What if you don't have those? What are they going to use? That's interesting.
It calls up the idea that as screenwriters we're going to have to be more and more creative in general to be able to show something exciting, that's something that has, can attract an audience. Where I think we've all been through the movie going era where some genre like horror is reinventing itself, where the action movie used to be the order of the day in the 80s and 90s, where detectives more often than not weren't showing off detective skills so much as they were shown shooting, because that's action you can visually represent. But now we have to be way more creative than that, because one, it's already been done, and two, society is what it is now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think too, like one of the things with horror is if it can be killed by a conventional weapon that anybody has access to, then it's really not as scary as it could be.
Wow. Yeah, I never thought of it that way, but everybody does have access to firearms. That's interesting.
Yeah, I see. I got to give it up to Jason and the yellow puffy sleeping bag. Just saying.
One of my all-time favorites.
Yeah, honestly, I love how it got made fun of in Jason X, even though that's a horrible movie. But it's just, if you want to make fun of the Friday the 13th gimmicks, that movie is just straight up great self-parody.
See, I love Jason X. I'm a fan of slasher films, and I thought that movie did it just right, where it towed that line between camp and straight horror, and I really loved it.
And half the cast was borrowed from Andromeda. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, which blew my mind. But one more question. I think we're going to go into some topical stuff that, David, we'd love you to weigh in on as well, especially since you've touched on a little bit of it given recent events, but in in America right now. But so what's your next project? I mean, I've heard, how audio podcasts can later get developed as other properties, and you've kind of converted from one medium and it could always end up going back to another. But what kind of future do you see for Red Riding Hoods beyond having multiple seasons within this space? But will there be another audio piece? Do you have another feature script you're developing right now, or?
Yeah, thank you. So I've a horror comedy that I wrote that they shot in Wisconsin last summer, or this past summer. It's in post production right now, so hopefully we'll get a trailer here shortly that we can show everybody. But it's called Big Buck Massacre, and it's about a hapless sales team that goes on a hunting retreat to try to develop that killer's instinct and close their sales finally. And lo and behold, a zombie deer is wreaking havoc in the countryside that they run afoul of. So it is it was so much fun to write, and like I wrote it with the guy who was going to direct it. He gave me specific, he was like, I have this location, we have access to this, and I want it to be about a deer with chronic wasting. Go. And so I came up with the concept. I was like, well, let's have fun with this because that sounds ridiculous. And then just the comedy kind of came so naturally. If you imagine The Office, like imagine if the Scranton branch from The Office got attacked by a zombie deer. Basically, that's what ends up happening. And so we had so much fun with it. It was so much fun to shoot. I got to go out to Wisconsin to be on set, and if the movie comes out half as fun as it was to make, it's going to be amazing. And so I really hope it does. The director Greg Elder's a really good guy, and here's hoping. And then after that, developing a different podcast because somebody hit me up saying that they had a potential producer for it. So I'm writing that up for them right now. And then Red Riding Hood's season 2 has not yet been greenlit, but we are hopeful that the numbers come through. We can make it happen. I've got it plotted out, and so if it doesn't end up happening, it's going to be heartbreaking because I think the story really elevates, and definitely the stakes raise quite a bit for the Red Riding Hoods themselves, and there's a lot of world left to explore for that storyline. So I definitely hope that we're not done with it, but as a writer, that's not up to me. So I will just continue developing things and writing and doing controlling what I can control, which is only what's on that blank page in front of me.
Roger
Well,
that.
I hope it continues.
We do,
I do
yeah.
have a small follow up question. I would be remiss if I didn't ask because I'm a female. Do you usually use female heroines, or did it just lend itself to this story specifically?
Oh,
I mean,
that's another really great question. I do tend to, and it's been pointed out to me before that I do tend to utilize a female protagonist most of my work, and the reason for that is I can I can look back on, I was raised by a single mom. I have two sisters. It was me, and I was the oldest brother. I had two little sisters. So very much raised around women, and very strong females as well. And so that growing up, even, I never questioned that how capable they could be handling any situation. And so it just came natural for me to write about them. And as I'm older now, I'm still surrounded by very strong females. My mom continues to be an inspiration. My sisters still are. My wife, the daughter that I'm raising, who's 11 now, and just, seeing how strong and how strong-willed, which can be, as a parent, sometimes that's not the greatest thing, but and I worry about the world that she's being raised in, and I think about all the different things that I can do to make this world better for her and for everyone like her. And that's sort of where I come from. I'm not trying to. There are one of the first conversations I had with Sarah, the director of the Red Riding Hoods, as well as Cassie, the producer, is I just said, listen, I am not. I understand that this may not be my story to tell, so I hand this over to you, and I am not going to get in your hair or try to, tell you anything to do, because this is a female story, and I would like I wrote it because I love horror and I feel like I have something to tell, but I also realize that it may not be the story that I should tell. So please, it is now your story. Shepherd it. I love these characters so much, and I entrust them to you. And Sarah has just brought it to life in ways that beyond my wildest dreams. I mean, she's done such an amazing job, and really been a blast working with her for sure.
See, I want to cite that the way that you handled that in that moment, the way that you went to them and said, this is your story to tell, is really a teachable moment for everybody that's a creator about avoiding preciousness and defensivity when it comes to writing, because we've all seen that and experienced that in varying degrees as we've come along and educated ourselves as entertainment writers. So just something that I think that we can all learn from is just the way that you eloquently handled that, the way that you handled that with a real sense of grace. Just it's a compliment to how you've handled yourself professionally.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
You're very welcome. Shall we go to topics, Denise?
Let's digress into this male topic.
Oh yeah, it's a very male topic apparently. Since we were just talking about guns, oh God. And Q, you are invited and more than welcome to weigh in on this. But wow, what a week for the production and crew of Rust. And I think everybody's heard one way or another in the news, whatever news affiliate you follow, about what's happened, the tragedy that happened. Um,
I mean,
and it's
of course, first off, I want to say like my sympathies and prayers go to the
yes.
family and the crew, and I mean Alec Baldwin. I mean, I don't know how he's gonna deal with this, but I mean, absolute should never have happened, in my
No,
opinion. I mean, I've worked on sets since I was a little kid. Um, that's why protocols are in place. That's why we have standards
it
and
makes me,
responsibilities.
yeah, exactly. It makes me wonder if the production was rushed in some way, because I know there's been word about one of those key assistant directors or assistant associate directors on set had a history of making mistakes like this. I'm like, how do you let that happen? How do you let that person get hired in that situation? And we could speculate six ways to Sunday, but there's no way around the fact that none of that speculation brings Mrs. Hutchins back. I mean,
Right.
just to see her and her pictures with her family, and the fact that she was a wife and mother and a director of photography, and a young one at that, a very talented one. It's just um, it tears you in half. It's almost anytime this happens, and it's funny how oftentimes it just doesn't get as much press. I mean, you remember you remember Brandon Lee from the
Mm-hmm.
incident with the
Yeah.
crow, or Vic Morrow and the two Vietnamese children in Twilight Zone the movie. And so there's precedent that's sad to say, and the fact that there's some that may still happen that we don't know about, which is kind of sad.
I mean, there's this term that's been pushed around all week as in low budget. It was a low budget production. And I equate that to my life where they would say this is a small production for live theater, you know? And in my mind, I've treated every single show as a big deal. Like, you get the same emphasis. So, like, if I'm doing a one woman show and, you know, I don't know. I'm not going to single out any state, but like in the boonies of some state, it gets the same respect as a Broadway show. And I think that's the way we have to continue through this industry is like there's not one thing that's more important than the other. Every show should be paid with the same respect despite the budget of having these protocols in place because they keep everyone safe.
Amen. And but this also begs the question. This is production, so it's really after the fact from what we as writers look at, even though that's the big show, being able to have something you've written get produced. But it, if anything, for us as writers, looking to get produced, looking to, get our stories out there, our what is our takeaway? It's not that we should avoid having guns in our stories, because I think we've already talked about
I
what
don't
our
think I can.
yeah, I mean, it depends on the story. I mean, not every story has guns in them. Um,
Well, you
but
can't
it
tell a Civil War or a World War II story without guns. I'm
Well, I see that's
sorry.
intrinsic, but you still have to be safe. But if you're not writing something like that, it's like it still begs the question: is what are our responsibilities? I think it's the same kind of thing as now that they have more protocols for intimacy scenes on sets.
Right.
You know, are we taking as much care and respecting the situation when we're writing the page? And is that carrying over enough? What do you
I
guys
mean,
think?
there are shows like The Rookie that decided that they weren't going to have any firearms on their script, which is really interesting considering it's a police drama. I'm interested to see how that evolves, but um, like you said, it's all about the story you're telling.
And Q, what do
Yeah.
you think?
Yeah, I agree with that very much, and I think it's something that we should certainly keep in mind. But I think uh, one of the things that I would advise is that, when we're writing, I think the first draft, especially, it's like we need to just satisfy the story that we're trying to tell. And then I believe that once the script gets optioned, or once you're in talks with the producer, at that point, then you start coming in and worrying about these things. Because if you're already censoring yourself, and I don't mean censor in a negative way, like, obviously we want safety first. For nobody should ever lose their life over a movie, over something as silly as a movie. And so I don't mean censorship in like the negative way like that, but I think, when you're writing, it should be with the intent that you are going to be working with a producer who will value that type of safety, where they can pull this off in a, because that had the producers followed proper protocols, that would never have happened. Had they had, the thing is, like, when you read about what was happening on that set, and, once again, I was not on that set, so there may be a story out tomorrow that completely contradicts everything that came before. But the accounts that I was reading of people who did quit because of the low turnaround times that were happening day to day, the number of people that walked off the set, the way that, according to eyewitness accounts, the armorer, the head of the prop department, she was basically muzzle, like, flat sweeping the muzzle across where people were standing, which is a
Mm-hmm.
huge no. Even if you go to the target range, you're not allowed to do that with a gun. The gun has to be pointed up or down. You can never point it to the side, because you always have to treat the gun like it's loaded and things like that. So it's like there were things that could have happened on set that could have prevented this, had everything been done the right way. But it wasn't done the right way, it was done the cheap way. They were trying to cut corners. I've
Mm-hmm.
been on these sets where, everybody is asked to work 18 hours because we only have enough budget for, 10 days or 14 days, and so everybody's just going to have to work until they're cross-eyed to make this to fit this timeline, and we're going to cut every corner that we can. That should never include a firearm, though, or stunts, or anything that could possibly endanger somebody. These producers chose to do that. I hope that they get charged. I hope that there is criminal action brought against it, because it's not like it was an act of God. This was a human mistake, that somebody didn't, and I hope that they do a proper investigation and figure out exactly who did not do their job, or who allowed this to happen, basically. So, but as a writer, I wouldn't I wouldn't worry about it in the early drafting of a script. Um, I tend not to look at scripts where, people with just shoot their way out of a situation for reasons that I already discussed. But it doesn't have to do with, thinking about once we get on set. Like I said, I'm just hoping that this is going to go to a producer who has their cast and crew safety in mind first, and is willing to, abide by what they can get done safely, instead of what can I get done fast.
Yeah, and that was my point earlier by saying it was rushed. I mean, if you're a writer producer, then it's all. I mean, the thing is, if you're a producer on this, it's all on you. This film will probably never see the light of day because of what's happened. I don't know where it was in its production, if it was at the beginning or the end, but I mean, to think of like completion guarantees, or the criminal and civil cases that are coming out of this, and it sounds like it's going to get pretty deeply investigated thus far. It's going to be a tragedy all the way around. I mean, Alec Baldwin's career may survive,
Mm-hmm.
but one can only guess what the director will probably do, since he was injured in the process. And um, yeah, there's a lot of careers that could be ended out of this, to say nothing of the fact that there is just no way that the Hutchins family will ever recover from this.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the most important, and that's, I mean, at the end of the day, that's what's most important is, a
Yes.
movie's a movie. Um, there really is, there's no excuse for it. And I've been around enough low budget producers to know why it happened and how it happened, but it doesn't excuse it at all. And all I can hope is that the only good that can come from this is that it was enough of a wake up call to the industry, especially the low budget film industry, to you understand the worst thing that can happen. And if they can take measures to make sure that it doesn't happen again, that's all that I can hope.
And I think the recent IATSE strike, I I've talked with people who were ready to walk out, um, and they understood this. I mean, even before this event happened, they understood that they have to reach out to these, because everybody thinks that they can make films on their own, but they have to reach out and say, like, you know what, I'm going to come to your college movie set and teach you how to do this properly because I don't want anyone to get hurt. And there's some sort of sense of responsibility, I hope, that comes down the line, um, from an event like this that is absolutely horrible. Yes, but I think it's a teaching moment that can put us in a new direction where the professional industry will lend a helping hand to those that are coming into the industry how to do things properly.
Right. And safety and respect really do need to be the order of the day. I know that a lot gets sacrificed just trying to get to the finish line
Yep.
in making a film, but I think we all agree on that. I think everybody with half a heart and half a brain would say it the same without any question. And it's interesting you mentioned the IATSE strike. I mean, this literally happens right after
Right
that was about to
together.
happen and got
Yeah.
averted. The timing is just the irony is so horrible.
Especially, they were talking about, and they were fighting for not having to drive 30 miles in the middle of the desert to after a 15, 16-hour day. This is what they were fighting to stop.
Exactly. And so the priorities I know probably are on straight. It's just not everybody's got the same priority, but maybe sadly it shouldn't take a life to shift perspective and paradigms on this.
Not at
And
all.
I mean, if it were the case, Brandon Lee would still be here, Vic Morrow would still
Right.
be here possibly. So yeah. Now, at the same time, speaking of the IATSE strike, we're past that. But we're not past the pandemic. But several delayed films are finally getting released. Numbers suggest that more people are returning to movies. Uh, I was reading the other day that the release date for 2022 is crowded for mainstream film. So, with productions still facing all sorts of safety issues like the ones we've just been talking about, I mean, making movies shouldn't be horrible. I mean, we may make a horror movie, but it shouldn't be a horrifying experience theoretically. Um, but that begs the question: what does the spec writer looking to prove themselves need to be watching for coming into this final stretch of 2021 and beyond? Since we're maybe seeing some light at the end of the tunnel with this pandemic, I don't know, but what do you guys think?
I'm going to let David go first because he's the professional writer.
Oh wow, I'm far far from a professional, but I appreciate it very much. I you know I feel like with streaming going where it is, and I've never been a fan of following trends because I've always felt like if you're chasing trends, the trends change on a whim, and you're always going to be behind. If you're always chasing something, you're always going to be behind it. Sort of, it's a very cliched business saying, but like Wayne Gretzky always said, he would pass the puck to where he knew the player would be, not to where they were. If you're writing the best story that you can tell, something that that you're passionate about, that you love, you have a better chance of finding a home than worrying about some of these trends. But that said, I do feel like with the proliferation of streaming, that's not going anywhere. Every time you turn around, there's another streaming channel popping up. If you're chasing those budgets that can pop up there, some of those mid-range budgets, I think that a AAA franchise, a Marvel film or things of that nature are going to go to, the established writers who are ahead of where you are, basically. Like, they are repped by the top agents. They have connections with the top studios. They're going to be doling out those huge budgets to these movies. If you're starting off, you need to think, how can I get something made with somebody I know, and thinking a little bit lower budget. The good news is that there are more and more options available for, a lot of these lower budget films to find a home thanks to all these streaming channels that we have.
do you think you would, if you were in a position to put something on a streamer, would you censor your story? Like, for example, would you submit a story about Columbine, considering what we're going through in this country with gun violence? I mean, would you talk about the election or politics, or do you think you would like take a story that you already have or building that has very little, um, I don't know, censored material? I don't know how else to put it.
Or something topical. Yeah. Would you
Yeah. So,
address
like,
something
would you,
topical?
yeah. Or do you think that would be like, nope, we're not touching that? And, like, that might hurt your chances.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think if you have an amazing story that centers on something that has to be told concerning a topic like that, tell it. If it's just to cash in, or if it's just to, because I can't tell you how many people I know that made movies about the pandemic.
Mm.
In
Yeah.
During COVID, they were like, "I've got a great idea for this. It's about somebody in a pandemic." I'm like, dude, nobody wants to. Nobody's gonna want to see it when these finally lift, and we're still waiting for them to finally lift. But when we're out of the blue, nobody's gonna want to look back on that. And
You
that's
know,
not to say. Oh, go ahead,
yeah,
Denise.
I wrote a short that was not about the pandemic, but then a lot of producers came to me and were like, "What about if you made this during the pandemic?" And I did, and it still didn't get anywhere. But I was like, at least I was able to do it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
See,
and so that's the thing, is that if somebody's telling you, "I will make this if you do this," then hey, go, exposure. I mean, getting something made, there's really no substitute for that. But just understanding that, it should always serve the story, right? Um,
yep.
yeah, but I know people who did like features and documentaries and stuff, and there's, it's like we want an escape from that. We don't want.
Yeah, I
oh,
mean,
amen.
truthfully, a little piece of me felt I was selling out. Like,
Mhm.
I was writing for like MTV, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna make you that music video that fits exactly with what the song is about." I mean, a little piece of me felt like that, but I'm still glad I had that experience, because now I'm ready for it the next time when somebody says, "Can you make it this?" Um,
Oh yeah.
but yeah,
And the hardest part of all this is, David, I'm with you. I mean, honestly, I'm not going to want to relive any aspect of pandemic life at all, to be honest. I mean, there were silver linings, for me here and there personally, but uh, I think we're overdue. We've had like so many years of so many dark movies, people trying to take beloved characters that were light and taking them down dark roads, that we're overdue for something like what we got in the 80s, a renaissance of some serious heartfelt, maybe hopefully they're very smart. We don't want them dumb, but some very lighthearted escapist fare with maybe a little bit of something to say. They
Ghostbusters.
well, yeah. I mean, any number of them. I mean, honestly, and they don't all have to be Back to the Futures, or something like that. I mean, and nor should they be. Um, but in the case of, say, in the horror environment, I mean, we're still going to have all those echoes of something horrifying. But I don't know that I want a horror movie character to be a terrorist with a bioweapon ready to go all IUD on people. That's just
Mhm.
that's the last experience I want as a moviegoer to see. And honestly, I'm thinking of it right now, seeing that I've just said it, and like as a screenwriter, I wouldn't be able to write that.
I
Yeah,
mean, think
absolutely.
about the Halloween movie that just came out. So happy they brought Jamie Lee Curtis back, but I mean that movie is insanely popular right now, and why?
Hmm.
Because it didn't tell a new story. It stuck to the storylines that it already had created, and I think there's something to be said about that. I mean, the horror genre as a whole, to me, um, is it's like a classic. You know what I mean? Like, you can make little adjustments here and there, but to take away from that genre, you're actually not making a genre specific movie. You're making something else. Like Blair Witch Project, I think was the last scariest movie for me. I don't like to be scared. So I don't go see them in the movies. I'll watch them in the comfort of my home. But Blair Witch Project was still a horror movie because you didn't know. It played to your fears. It played to your insecurities. And I think that's what the horror genre is. For me, is playing to that insecurity. So I think if you're going to take and put something like the pandemic in it, then you're making something else. You're not making a horror genre movie.
Yeah, good point.
Right. And now, on top of that, you want to talk about the ultimate final girls. I mean, you got Laurie Strode, Jamie Lee Curtis's character in Halloween, or my favorite of the horror genre, although I really qualify it more in sci-fi. And I know, David, you and I have bonded over this several times, but Aliens, Ripley. I mean, you want to talk
Yep,
about the final girl
absolutely.
that went back and, as a cathartic experience, faced her fear. Now, that to me speaks volumes. To me,
Yeah.
horror now has to go into a space where people are standing up to that fear.
Yeah, and you actually, I mean, you could make a really solid argument that the first Alien is a slash movie. It follows
Absolutely.
a lot of the standards of a slasher film very successfully down to the final girl. So,
Yep.
And if you haven't seen it, the Aliens, not Alien 2, of what is that movie? What is that Netflix series? Um, how
The movies that
movies
made us.
movies that made us. Thank you. The Aliens one is brilliant and actually lends to that aspect you're talking about, Ripley, and how Sigourney Weaver was actually that person in real life that actually, struggled to get that movie get made. So, I mean, that was really cool.
Oh
that's
yeah.
awesome.
And that movie's got all kinds of allegories. Every horror movie is based in some sort of, deep seated fear, as you were mentioning earlier, David. I took a horror movie class in my bachelor's degree days, and they wanted,
A horror movie class.
yeah, and we saw
Wow.
some early horror movies, like stuff by Val Lewton and the original Cat People, those kind of movies, Universal horror films, that sort of thing from the
Did you watch
1930s.
Bad Taste too?
I wish that would have made it so much more interesting. Instead, I got a class that I'm sorry, there were nights where they showed us the movie and I damn near slept through it, which is sad to say as a film student, but you know, bachelor's degree, what are you going to do? But but what I thought was interesting is that the teacher always wanted us to, say that all horror movies are about sex. And I didn't want to actually subscribe to that notion at the
No.
time.
There was that one short we had to watch in school, and it was about. Um, I'm not going to remember the name of it, but it was about a guy that was playing a prank on his wife or
Oh,
girlfriend.
Spider.
Yes, and
Australian short. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, Q, I know you saw that too. We were in the
yes,
same
Yep,
residency as me.
yep, I remember that.
um, and that to me was like the freshest take on a horror movie that I've seen in a really long time. Like that was something different and something new, and how like the story laid on top of each other. Um, yeah, I wish there were more horror movies like that because then I would
Okay.
watch more of them.
Okay. I'm going to take a quick poll between the three of us. Okay. Favorite line from a horror movie? Q, go.
Oh gosh, then it put me on the spot, and I'm trying to think through all of my favorite horror films.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, come back to me.
Okay. No problem. Denise?
It's not actually a line, but the first scene ever to give me nightmares was the tree in the original Poltergeist because I
Ooh.
had a tree outside my window and I still will not sleep with a tree outside my window. I will close the curtains and turn the lights on
You
because I
know,
don't want that tree coming to life and eating me.
see, Poltergeist is it's funny how it's the scariest movie ever and it's PG. That blows my mind still. I mean, the tree didn't get me, the clown didn't get me, but when Joe Beth Williams ends up in like that pool space because they're putting in a pool and
Yes.
it's raining and it's muddy and she's wearing nothing but a night t-shirt, and the reason I mention that is that it's got to be uncomfortable swimming in the mud with a bunch of dead corpses. That's messed up, like all these skeletons.
Two things. The Amityville house is down the block from my uncle's house, and
Oh,
I think that's really cool. Um,
or freaky.
No, well, he used to be a sheriff. He's retired now, but he tells me stories all the time about what people do to that house, and I'm like, that must be horrible, especially if you're just living there as a normal person. But I don't know. And now I'm gonna forget the second thing.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, we can come back to you. And Q,
Okay,
I'm gonna
thank you.
I'm gonna come back to you in a second. But dialogue line, my favorite lines, I got two. It's a tie. And one because I think it's just absolutely brilliant, and one because it's of course from a great moment in a movie we were just talking about. So I'll go ahead and throw that out there. But honestly, the moment that Ripley comes through that door in the power loader, ready to fight the Queen alien, get away from her, you bitch! I'm like, yes, that's always
That
going to
was
be a crowd
actually my
pleaser.
second point. Aliens was
Mm.
actually initially a rated X movie.
Yeah, they had to trim it down,
Yeah, they had to turn him down. I
and
think
Wow.
that's yeah. I never
that.
would have seen it if it was rated R.
Well, and what's crazy is it's funny how that movie is. It's funny how it's less of a horror movie and a science fiction actioner because of the allegory of Vietnam and space, all that stuff. So, plus it's James Cameron, so there you go.
All right, David, we've padded enough time for you to come up with a really good answer.
All right, so I'm gonna go back to my favorite horror movie of all time is the original Candyman. I really loved the remake as well, but the
Nice.
original is my favorite. And the line that he delivers, where he says, "They call me a killer because I shed innocent blood, but what is innocent blood for? I ask, if not for shedding." And I remember that just hit me like so poetic for a killer to say, and the way, and of course Tony Todd's delivery of it, just
Yes,
so creepy,
he's
so great, so great.
he's got a great voice. I don't care what he makes. I mean, he was
Yeah, he
on
really
Chuck,
does.
and I loved his delivery of every line he ever uttered.
Yeah.
So. Well, my second favorite line is actually from Scream 2. What's your favorite scary movie? Showgirls.
That would be your favorite line.
Well,
Oh my
I'm
gosh.
sorry, it's ubiquitous and it throws a bad movie under the bus at the same time. I hear so many people say that Showgirls is misunderstood, and I'm like, no, if anything, I think I can make a great argument for how Showgirls is a horror movie without slashers. It's just everybody's a monster except for one person in that movie.
Were you ever a showgirl?
Didn't you know I always wanted to be a dancer in Vegas? I mean,
I mean, I do know that, but
that's a Kevin
there's
Smith
nobody that
moment
would
if ever
pay to
there.
see that.
I
So
just shamelessly stole from Kevin Smith and Chasing Amy, and he'll never forgive me. I know.
wait till we have him on the show and then you can bring it up.
Hey, from your lips to his ears. So when he
That's
comes
right.
on, and honestly, an earlier unrecorded conversation, and Q, you might love this. This might be a great way to cap off the episode. But I was telling Denise about this horrible, horrible horror comedy idea, and it's not the one I know I sent you one months back. This is worse. So I'm actually have a goal of having the worst possible one to suggest. And this one's called Cannibal High. And the idea is it's William J. Hannibal High School, and it's the high school where all the drug rejects go to. So all the kids are like smoking weed all the time. And so, but it gets the nickname of Cannibal High because they're all high and they think they're hallucinating the slasher of the story. But the slasher turns out to be a cannibal who wants to eat teenage flesh.
Oh.
So, and it's fear of the unknown all the way around. And I don't see too many cannibals as horror movie villains, but
Yeah, not since Hannibal Lecter kind of did it, and everybody's afraid to follow.
well, there and Night of the Living Dead. You want to talk about the perfect cannibalism fear driver?
And I'm just gonna say that everybody's scared to eat fava beans, but and Chianti, but
And a nice Chianti.
You know what? I wouldn't eat turkey legs for a whole week after seeing one scene of the zombies eating in Night of the Living Dead.
I wonder if there's an uptick of fava bean sales and Chianti sales around Halloween.
We gotta, I'm sure the internet has that information
I'm sure
somewhere.
we should find that out.
In 1991 or 1992, how are the sales of Chianti and fava beans? If you have nothing better to do, you should really be writing, not looking that.
That's never stopped me before.
Oh, that's a good point. It hasn't stopped us from all looking up like
Mhm.
that cat piano video that I
I
know
have an
is always out
interesting
there.
follow-up question. Do you write at night or do you write
Ooh,
during the
that's
day?
a Good one.
I write at night because I have to, because I can only write when my kids are asleep. So just because,
Interesting.
not because I'm, that they're gonna read what I'm writing, just because that's the only time I get to myself. So
And do you have like a goal in mind? Like, I'm going to write 1,000 words today.
nope, nope, not unless there's a producer breathing down my neck saying, "Where's my treatment?" or "Where's this scene that you promised me?" So
Oh, that was one of the drinking game items we had in our
Questions, yes.
screenwriting drinking game, because you have to. I don't remember if it was a shot or a gulp. I'll send it to you. You can find out and see if
Yeah.
you want to
yeah,
play along.
nice.
It would be fun if we got a bunch of people to do that game. That game was fun.
You know what? And we might have to modify it. I think we invite the same people to, help revise it, and then bring them all on. And Q, you'd be welcome to join us in on it. And um,
Sounds
we'll have
right up
to,
my alley.
yeah, because you and I have a relationship to beer and everything that most people wouldn't understand.
So
But
I
yeah,
am scrolling along the bottom of the screen. Wow, some ways to get in touch with us. And David, if you would keep us apprised of any new developments in your writing career, we would happily share them. And we'd love to touch base with you again when season 2 gets greenlit, because I know it will. Um,
yeah, man,
and it's
we've listened to it. We've got faith.
yeah.
All right. Well, I
I
appreciate it very much, and I definitely will.
I feel like
Yeah.
we should start your fan club. Like, we should start the red, the red fan club. We'd have to come up with a cool name, like Red Band Fan Club.
See, I'm seeing so much cosplay capability out of this
Exactly. That's what I'm
podcast.
saying.
This could be something serious, like just have a live read of the pilot episode at a horror movie convention, or like one of the comic book conventions. There's some seriously cool stuff that could be done here. But that's why I think having you on here and having us evangelize to everyone we know, which I know Denise and I are going to do, and our listeners, go to your favorite podcast listening channel, streamer, what have you. Look for Red Riding Hoods from Violet Hour Media, written by our good friend David Quiroz Jr. Go to your
Wow. Thank
podcast,
you.
go to your podcast streamer, download it,
Do
listen,
it now.
do it now after you listen to us.
I did come up with 2 different departing words of wisdom. Halloween and fall are my favorite times of year, because I'm kind of like the Martha Stewart of being creepy. I don't know if that's true. Yeah. So I came up with 2. One is by H.P. Lovecraft, and the other is by R.L. Stein. So you guys get to decide which ones I read tonight.
Also the guest.
R.L. Stein.
Okay, cool. So departing words of wisdom. Most fears are basic. Fear of the dark, fear of going down in the basement, fear of weird sounds, fear that somebody is waiting for you in your closet. Those kinds of things stay with you no matter where you are and no matter what age you are. And I think that lends perfectly to what you were saying about your writing style and your creativity, because those intrinsic basic fears are something that we do carry with us all the time. I'm still scared of trees outside my bedroom window. And I think that's what leads to the horror genre being this fulfilling and always scary and always fun genre that we always continue to watch.
That's great.
Yeah.
And I think that's a
And
perfect way to cap off this episode.
yeah, so be safe out there this Halloween. Check your candy.
Yeah,
If
trick
you
or treat if you can, but if not, you can always have a party at home. You can always, have a listening party of Red Riding Hoods, and
put your
not,
headphones on, get a bottle of Chianti, maybe a can of fava beans.
or just knock back a couple of almond joys. No one's going to be looking.
No judgment here. We are a judgment-free zone.
Art is love, people. Art is love.
Love it.
Well,
All right,
hey,
thanks,
David, thank you
guys.
for coming on.
Yes,
Absolutely.
thank you
Hey, I
so
really
much.
appreciate both of you. It's great to speak to you both again. And just let's keep it up. Hopefully we can do this again. I really appreciate the support, and look forward to us getting to do it again.
Yes, please, please come back. We would love to have you on.
You'd be more than
Um,
welcome.
and to our listeners, remember, send your information in, send your log lines in, because Logline Thunderdome will continue, and I will get my lead back.
Yeah, we're tied. And honestly, folks, look, there's only one Logline Thunderdome. Other, podcasts out there might be
Mm-hmm.
doing it, but we started it, man. We're the original.
We are the OG back in the day original.
And mine
Um,
will win next time.
you will never win,
Oh,
even though you won 2.5 times.
Two and a
Um,
half.
so have a great holiday, everybody. Keep an eye on our social media, because we do have some amazing guests coming up and some fun episodes as well. Remember, you can keep an eye on us on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on Twitter. We are on all the social medias, so please do keep us in your sights.
Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween!